Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. Welcome to the Impact webinar, CCES First Look, Spotlight on Europe's groundbreaking CCUS projects. My name's Aling Tang, content producer at Leader Associates, and it's my great honor to be hosting today's session. The European Commission has recently unveiled its Clean Industrial Deal, a transformative initiative that positions decarbonization as a key driver of industrial growth. This landmark deal not only reinforces the Commission's unwavering commitment to achieving a decarbonized economy by 2050, but also marks a pivotal step toward a sustainable industrial future. Our exclusive session today will highlight a selection of trailblazing European CCUS projects that will be featured in the CCES agenda and discuss the EU's key policy and commercial drivers for CCUS growth. This webinar serves as a prelude to the Carbon Capture Europe Summit 2025, Europe's leading event for CCUS, taking place from April the 29th to 30th at KIT Royal Tropical Institute in Amsterdam. It brings together industry leaders across the European CCUS value chain, fostering discussions that are crucial for driving Europe's decarbonization agenda. Here, I would also like to extend our gratitude to our sustainability partner, Gade, Sustainable Port Partners, Port of Rotterdam, Port of Antwerp Bruges, and our distinguished sponsors, Rockwell Automation, Viridian, Valoric Energy, and more. Thank you for your support. Before we start, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared online. We encourage active participation in the Q&A sessions following each presentation. Now, without further ado, it's my honor to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Mats Gade, Head of Denmark and Chief Commercial Officer at INEOS Energy. Mr. Gade will take us on a deep dive into Project Greensand, a groundbreaking initiative that's setting new benchmarks in the industry. Welcome, Mr. Gade. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll just put my video on here. Hello, everyone. So thank you for the privilege of being able to speak here today. So just wanted to share a presentation on Greensand and where we are and the progress we've made over the period here. So if we just dive into it directly, what is Greensand really? So if you look at the left map here on the top, we have an area up to the top right, which is called CA area, which is actually the platforms you see in the picture to the right. So that's the location. It's on the Danish shelf, and where we are now in the story is actually we are the operator of these oil and gas fields, but they are coming to the maturity point and the end of that, which means that they are now in a process where we will be decommissioning the field. But since we have the infrastructure out there now, the timing is right to really utilize this for CCS, and it's also the right different factors there in terms of reservoir, etc. So if we go on to this next slide, what we've done a while back, so back in 23 was actually we did a pilot test, which was the first step on our journey. So what we embarked on here, as I was saying, is the pilot project, and what you can see here is that we had to really prove up the case that we could do it safely. And what we did in the pilot was that we took some CO2 actually from a site down in Antwerp, and we took a dedicated ship and we basically put on a structure so it could carry the ISO containers, and we sailed it up to the Nini platform in the North Sea. And what you can see at the bottom there is actually the process we went through. We took the CO2, which is captured and liquefied, we put it on small ISO containers, and then we trucked it to the harbor side where there was a vessel we loaded it onto, which we sailed all the distance up to the Nini field in the Danish sector. And then on the right hand side you have the ship actually in the process of unloading, where actually the small piece you can see at the bottom of the tower of the rig, it's a rig standing there, it's actually the platform we're injecting through, and the big one is the rig, because we needed to have equipment and everything else on the rig there while we did it. If we go on to the next slide, you can see a picture of this is the site where we did capture the CO2. So the chimney sort of on the right hand side, that's actually where you capture the CO2 and put it into the liquid phase. And then if we go on to the next slide, that's the boat we have there. So we were able to take around 40 containers per load, ISO containers, which actually was around 8% of the world market. We took almost 10% of the CO2 ISO containers. So we lifted the containers on the boat. So we have two systems going, and you can see there on the right-hand side in the process of loading it up. And then we sailed back and forth while we were filling containers at the harbor area and by the side. And then we took out the one loading and we sailed back after injecting in the North Sea. So around 800 tons per shipment we could carry out on this. Obviously not ideal scale or anything else, but really critical in terms of doing the first pilot project. If we move on to the next one. This is really the storage process we did on the pilot. So again, the picture on the top left, that's the boat and the rig we injected through. On the right, you can see how the small containers are connected up to the platform via a riser there. And then on the seabed, what we did put on the bottom left is actually pictures of small anodes. So these are nodes that could take seismic shooting. So we could actually get an image of how the CO2 reacted in the reservoir, which was quite important also for us to understand properly. So that was really the key elements and the value chain in the process of the pilot, which was the first step. So if we move on to the next slide. So obviously a lot of attention. I won't spend too much time on this, but we had it's a very important topic, and what we did see was that CCS has actually created quite a lot of attention around. There's a lot of positives reactions actually to CCS, which we've seen. So that's been quite a positive terms in terms of how the public domain has received this message on starting the carbon storage. If we move on to the next page. So by the end of this, after we did the pilot, we had to do a lot of analysis just to make sure that we were comfortable around the results we have achieved from the pilot. What we have done since is do all the hard work, analyzing the data and everything else. And this has led up to the point where we have received an independent verification from DNV. So they have now verified that this is a safe storage, which was of course very important for the next steps for us to go into the commercial phase, which is what I will talk about in a second. So we did get a certificate of conformity by an independent verifier, which we of course gave us the comfort to move into the next step. So if we go to the next slide. So where we are now is that the cost of the storage is really the axis on the left we have. On the bottom is really the process we're going through. And the first one we did was what I just went through, was creating the proof of the concept. We needed to make sure this could work, and it worked effectively. So we did this, which was sort of a first full value chain where we took it from one country to another country for pure climate purpose to inject CO2. We did this to make sure, of course, we could do it safely, as mentioned. The next step on the road is what we have embarked on now, is that we are now in a process of executing a commercial project. Now we are going to do this, and I'll talk to that in a second. We'll do this in a different way to make it more cheaper, and also that comes into the scale. What we are embarking on here is really the biogenic segment. So this is mainly CO2 coming from biogas producers creating a negative emission. So that's the step where we will try to go up to around 400,000 tons per year. After this, we hope that we will see some of the bigger industrial emitters being ready to start storing. And then eventually we have a potential to take us up to 3 to 8 million tons. So if we go on to the next one, then I will talk a little bit about the commercial concept. So this is what we call the Greensand future concept, which is the next phase, the commercial phase. The way this works is that we are taking the CO2 from the biomethane production. So this could be, as you can see on the left, the biomethane producers capturing the CO2. They're already in a process where they're getting the ethane into the system, or methane, but then they also have the CO2, which they capture today, but basically some of them just venting. Once that is captured, they will have to put it into liquid form, transport it, and that's the sort of middle part where you can see a truck standing there. So there will be a truck going from the biogas facilities into a harbor side, where there's a temporary storage, which we will establish. So that's our responsibility. You can see the sort of dotted line coming across. That will go into a ship, which will sail off to the platform where we'll inject the CO2. So that's the value chain on this one. If we go on to the next slide. There's a few things here on this. So you can see basically on the storage and the vessel. On the left-hand side, we are creating a temporary storage on the harbor side, where we will be able to have a size of around 6,000 tons available for basically storing. This will then be connected into the harbor front, so you're able to offload it in, or take the CO2 and load that onto the ship. The ship size is on the right-hand side, so this is a carrier which will be able to carry around 5,500 tons per shipment, which equates up to around 400,000 tons a year. The duration here is around 8 years we have this for, but we have more capacity, so of course we hope to get more ships in the future. So the first ship here, this will offload through a system. You can see sort of a hose coming to the seabed. So we're building a system that can transport the CO2 up over the platform and then into the reservoir there. And there we're going to use some of the existing equipment as much as we can. The hose and the injection equipment is completely new, but some of the platform equipment is of course what we're going to reuse. All the pumping and everything else is going to go from the boat off. So if we go on to the next slide. So where are we really on the project, the status and the first injection? So we've done the submission of the storage application. We did that a while back. We do have achieved now a verification of the storage. We also do have the contracts with both emitters, the port and the vessel. So all of the contracts are in place, and therefore we have also taken the project into a sanction. We got the indicative response from the authorities that we are on track with an approval. So we expect to be able to sanction, which we've done in December, but also to execute the project. So we are ready within the 12 months period. So early 26 is the expectation. We expect to receive the final approval of the storage during the summer. And then, yeah, as I said here, late this year, but or early 26, we expect to do the first injection there. And then hopefully we will continue this journey, building on the scale, and then also hopefully getting more volumes. We do have capacity for up to 4 to 8 million tons. We're only taking up around 400,000 tons now a year. So obviously more capacity, which will again build scale and more potential out there. And obviously on the right, what we have is our chairman, Jim, who's very keen on supporting this. He thinks it's a very interesting and a far better way to decarbonize Europe than actually deindustrializing Europe. So that's important for INEOS overall. Moving on to the next. I think that's all from me. So over to any potential Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. Gade, for sharing such informative details about Greensand future and for presenting an inspiring vision. So during your presentation, we've received a question from our audience. Let's check it out and address some of them. So one of our audience asked, how long does the loading and deloading of the ISO containers take?
So how long does the loading and deloading of the containers take? So if we look at the cycle here, what we do expect is that we will take around 3 to 4 days for a full cycle. So what will happen is that we expect that we will take around half a day to basically fill the ship. And then we will sail out, which will take another half a day. We will be offloading, which will take plus 1 day. And then we'll have to sail back also. So it's a full cycle of around 3 days, 3 to 4 days from one end to the other end, which gives us around, let's say, 80 to 100 trips annually on the ship.
Thank you. And the second question is one we collect from our online registration form. So the question is, what role do public-private partnerships play in this project? And how does the project ensure financial viability?
Yeah, so I think on this one, it's clear to say that in terms of financial viability, that the project is, as we also saw from the curve, when you start with the pilot, it's a sub-commercial project because the scale isn't really there yet. We're trying to create and build scale. We're slowly getting there. Obviously, a lot of the funding, which is critical right now, and if we take that all the way from the funding of the biogas biogenic element, that is because they have received certain funding from the government to support them in capturing the CO2. So there's been pools available for that. Obviously, another part of this equation is that they're selling off the negative credits, because when we take CO2 from the air and store it permanently, we have negative emissions, which creates a negative offset that can be used by companies pledged to a net zero target. So a big part of the value chain there and the income is, of course, selling these credits on that side of the fence for the biogas emitters. They're then paying us a fee for storing this permanently. And for this first project, we have also been receiving EU funding. But what we are seeing is, by one of the next two ships, we are seeing a decent case where we can start seeing this case breaking even. So we do think and anticipate that at some point we will see within the end of this, maybe around 2030, that there will be a decent break even on the case. But for now, obviously, to kick off the industry exactly as we did for the wind industry or what happened there, then there has to be some subsidies to get this starting and building the right scale. But there's a lot of optimization to be done to drive down prices, which creates a decent point, I think, for between the cost of whether it's industrial and thereby avoiding the ETS quota, or whether it's in terms of creating negative credits that can actually create the right income incentive to make this work going forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your detailed answers. Greensand is truly a testament to what's possible when innovation meets ambition. It not only sets a benchmark for European emitters and industry leaders, but also inspire confidence in the scalability and reliability of CCS across the sector. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing the groundbreaking project with us today.
Sure. Thanks. Cheers.
Next up, let's turn our attention to a CO2 storage facility ready to boost Southern Europe's CCS ambitions. Please join me and welcome Mr. Nikolas Rigas, Head of Carbon Storage at EnEarth. He will bring a roadshow of the Prinos CO2, a first-of-its-kind initiative in Southeast Europe and the East Mediterranean, and also a game-changer for the industry. Welcome on stage, Mr. Rigas.
Hi, Eileen. Thank you very much. And it was great to hear Mads as well. It's very nice to see other projects around the world, going strong and going forward. When we're trying to create an industry here, the more positive and good examples we have, the better it is for the world to accept carbon storage and see how good it is as a solution to decarbonize. With that being said, I'll tell you a bit about our story and how we started and where we are in terms of the world. Europe has started very strong in the North Sea, and kind of the eastern part of Europe is decarbonizing. But we are in a region that we lack the storage capacity. And the Mediterranean in general has been a region that has been neglected by the energy industry. But at the same time, it accounts for a very large amount of Europe's CO2 emissions. Italy, Greece, Spain, France, they're all big industrial players that do need to decarbonize. And at the moment, there's very few solutions. So as I said before, Greece and the Mediterranean doesn't have a lot of storage options. Prinos is the only oil field in Greece that has ever produced oil. And therefore the only suitable storage site that we know for the short or medium term in Greece as well. The first thing we did, obviously, was to kind of start by testing and doing our kind of subsurface work, we ended up getting a CPR from NSAI confirming that we have 66 million tons of 2C reserves to store CO2 underground, with a potential annual injection of up to 3 million tons a year. So we secured our subsurface, and then we moved and we spoke to the government, and we told them that, as Mad said very correctly previously, the biggest risk here is the first lost capital. Who's going to kick off the industry, take the risk that comes with any new industry, and essentially be the money that is the most at risk? The Greek government came very early on and committed 100 million of RRF money from the Greek Recovery and Resilience Facility. They showed their support towards the project, and they see this as Greece's third decarbonization leg. Greece, as you have seen, has done great advancements in wind, great advancements in solar, and now the next step that they see is decarbonizing their industry. No one wants to lose industry. No one wants to deindustrialize their country. And therefore, we see, and Greece sees, carbon storage and this specific project as their way to keep Greek industry alive and at the forefront of the decarbonization race. At the moment in Greece, we have three capture projects that are funded by the Innovation Fund as well, which are up to 3.8 million tons of CO2 emissions on capturing. And then we have our storage site funded as well from the Greek RRF and the Connecting Europe facility. The issue that we have, as I mentioned previously, is that we have 3.8 million tons of funded capture projects, another 2 to 3 million tons of emitters that potentially want to store their CO2 as well, and we only have 3 million tons of storage capacity a year. This moves me to my next slide, which is a map of what's happening in Europe. And you can very clearly see that there is a very dense kind of area on the North Sea where there's 30-40 projects happening, or on the route to become a reality. While in the Mediterranean there is practically 3 to 4 projects, and other part of ENI and ourselves, the other projects are very immature still. And you can see that Italy has 63 million tons of CO2 emissions, industrial CO2 emissions. Greece has 13 million tons of industrial CO2 emissions. And collectively, ENI's first phase that they're testing now is 0.02 million tons, planning to increase it to 4 million tons and then to expand it even further. But both our project and the other project in the Mediterranean can't even cover less than, not even 10% of the industrial emissions in the region. So we are in a situation where essentially we have too much supply with too little storage capacity. This leads us to, we need to find more storage. Going to the North Sea is very expensive. So, Egypt and Northern Africa is your next best solution. But before I go there, and what I emphasize always is, let's get the projects that we have in our hands done first, and then we can go and move on to, the next projects and how we're going to decarbonize the entirety of the Mediterranean. Having said that, due to this lack of storage, this is how our emitter kind of outlook looks. Where we are getting CO2, or we have signed non-binding contracts with emitters from France, Italy, Croatia, Bulgaria, and a strong emitter base from Athens that have received a lot of money to capture and transport their CO2 to our facility. We will be injecting in an old oil field. So this is a field that has been producing since the 1980s. It's close to the end of its life. It still has some life left into it, but we are choosing to go into the reservoir that we know the best. So essentially the water level below the oil field. And then once we've filled that up with the 66 million tons of capacity that we have, we will start exploring other aquifers, gas fields, and other smaller pockets that exist in the region. But as I said, our initial focus is let's start by filling up the oil field. We know the field very well. We have the 3D seismic. We have the wells that have been drilled. And that is the most secure. A little bit on the facility side, and again, very similar to the INEOS project. Our phase is going straight into the pipeline. We're not going to be doing ships, but we're going to have a very similar terminal where it's going to be receiving CO2 by ships or compressed by trucks. We're going to have a marine jetty, an extension to the existing jetty that's there at the moment, 6 temporary storage tanks, and then some compressions, pumping and heating to send the CO2 into a pipeline. The pipeline is a 16-kilometer pipeline, and it will end up in a new platform with 6 CO2 injectors and 9 water producers. The theory that we have and what we've been trying to tell the entire industry is we will be doing everything new. Anything that touches CO2 is going to be brand new. There is an existing facility in place. We could have repurposed certain things, but the risk of something going wrong in an industry that is not extremely mature yet is not a risk we want to take. So my message to everyone in this industry is let's not make any mistakes in the early stages and harm this industry. It is something that has gotten very negative press in the past years. We're off to a very good start, and we shouldn't taint the industry with trying to get cheaper solutions, which in the end of the day will not be cheaper as well. A little bit on our commercial boundary as well. As I mentioned before, we do have 12 MOUs signed with 5.4 million tons of CO2 emissions aimed towards being captured to come to our facility. We will not be doing the transport. We will only be doing the storage. So unloading of the CO2, temporary storage, regasification, and a small pipeline to our offshore facilities to be stored underground. In terms of where we are, we have worked with Halliburton, as I said, from the very beginning to do our subsurface studies, where essentially they did two very extensive studies to secure this 1 million tons, then increase to 3 million tons. We worked with Wood to do our facilities engineering, and then we did a lot of additional studies to make sure that the caprock formation is there, the legacy wells are not going to have any issues, and all the other requirements to get to the exploration permit that we were awarded back in 2022. Throughout this period, we submitted a storage permit back in July of 2024, which we are expecting to get in the next couple of weeks, the draft version of it until it gets completely approved. The permit is for 1 million tons because we wanted to have a two-stepped approach where we started at 1 million tons and then we increased to 3 million. But the Greek government intervened and asked us to go straight to the full scale of this facility. So the first phase will be operational by the end of 2026, but very soon after we will be increasing straight to the 3 million tons that the field can accommodate. In terms of schedule, the plan is that we will be taking FID in 2026, Q1 of 26, aligned with the emitters that are aiming to get their projects over the line by then. But in parallel, we are starting to construct the first phase of the facility. So we're pre-investing a lot of money, coupled with the grants as well. So in Q4 of next year, we're going to be installing a platform. And Q1 of 2026, we're going to start our drilling campaign with the first 4 wells being drilled until Q3 of 2026 to be able to have a 1 million ton injection facility by then. And then in 2027 and 28, we're going to be increasing it's going to be the ramp up phase to get to the 3 million tons that we've promised the government. Emitters are likely to bring us CO2 by the end of 2028. So the facility will be operational for tests and for other kind of smaller quantities. Some CO2 is going to be trucked to us. We're planning on doing a small direct air capture unit onshore. and using that CO2 for certain tests, and small volumes from the local industry as well. I think that's it from my side.
Thank you, Mr. Rigas, for that inspiring and comprehensive overview of the Prinos project. And now let's check some of our audience's questions. The first question from our audience is, what pipes are used by the Prinos project to transport CO2? And do you foresee that the CO2 delivered to your storage system needs to be very high quality as to not corrode pipes?
That's a very good question, and as it's a discussion we've been having with the emitters, because we've told them that if we go for exotic materials in the pipeline, the cost is going to be transferred onto you. And there's a very thin balance between how much you clean up your CO2 to have it at the highest spec compared to the quality of the pipes and that we're going to be using. So we've sat in a few different meetings with them. We've followed the guidelines that Northern Lights has given and DNV has created for CO2 specifications. With Wood, we've worked to create our own specification sheet for the facilities that we have. We've presented it to the emitters. It is something that they have accepted. We are trying not to go for exotic materials when it comes to the pipeline. The wells themselves will have exotic materials, but we're trying to keep it as simple as we can. The more simple it is, the less it's going to cost, the less problems we're going to have in the future. So it's if that gives you an answer on what material we're going to be using, I think keep it simple and communication with the emitters to create this perfect lowest value chain cost, because it's not a matter of the cost to us, it's a matter of who is going to take the cost. In the end of the day, it's the emitters paying for the storage, it's the emitters paying for the transport, it's the emitters paying for the capturing. So it's a matter of who wants to bear this cost.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. And the second question is, in your opinion, what are the specific risks and opportunities for CCS deployment in Southern Europe compared to other regions? And what is the potential for cross-border collaboration on projects within this region?
So the Southern Europe has this advantage that because we have very, very few storage sites, we were able to very quickly coordinate with the emitters and try to get these projects over the line. When there's too much optionality and you try to create a new industry, a lot of times you can get lost in not knowing where to take your CO2, not knowing what to do. This is an opportunity that we have, that essentially this has gotten out of the way. We have our storage site, we have our emitters, we have streamlined essentially, the project itself. We've received the funding from the European Union. We've received the funding from Greece and the support. The regulatory frameworks are in place. So now it's on us to get it down and get the project executed. That is the biggest opportunity we have. A year ago, we were in a very different position. We were still trying to get it over the line, but today, as we sit here, it is a matter of us and the emitters and the transporters sitting down and executing it with all the support that we've received from the governments and the European Union. In terms of threats, you are still talking about a very new industry. Carbon prices are still very low. So when you talk to emitters and when you talk to the decision makers in these businesses, they look at their outlooks that say that, okay, CO2 is going to go up to 150, 160, 200. But reality is CO2 today is at 70 euros a ton. And none of these projects will make any sense if CO2 prices don't start to increase. So it's a matter of Europe taking a decision that if we want to decarbonize, we need to push forward and continue. We need to drive up carbon prices in order to get industry to decarbonize. We need to be very strict and not go back to our ideologies because other countries have elected leaders that do not have the same standards that we do, and when it comes to sustainability and decarbonization. And we have decided and we have set as a society a rule that we shouldn't be emitting CO2 and we should find solutions for it. The biggest threat is with everything, with the global turmoil, is taking a few steps back. We are all in a very good position in this decarbonization race. Let's keep pushing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your informative answers. And thank you once again for sharing the exciting progress of the Prinos CO2. It's clearly set to play a pivotal role in the European CCUS landscape, and we look forward to seeing its continued progress.
Thank you, Eileen.
As we've seen from our first two speakers, the technological and industrial advancements in CCUS are nothing short of remarkable. But none of this would be possible without the right policies and commercial frameworks to support growth. Our next speaker, Ms. Lucia Verratti, Senior Policy Advisor at Rigas, will shed light on the critical role of policy and commercial drivers in shaping the future of CCUS. Welcome, Ms. Verratti. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Eileen. So thank you very much for having me here today. And thank you also for the other speakers. It was very interesting to also get to know more about the projects. I think with my presentation, we will take a little bit of a step back, but especially to look at the broader picture. And I'm going to try to identify, with your help as well, the policy and commercial drivers for CCUS growth. And this especially taking into consideration the latest development that we have seen in Brussels and in all Europe. Before we do that, I just wanted to briefly mention who we are, who is Rigas. And I'm going to go to my next slides. So Rigas is a trade association. We are based in Brussels, and we represent more than 100 members of gas companies and associations, which are active across the entire gas value chain, going from wholesale to distribution to retail, but also to, for example, use of gases in mobility and technology providers, including, of course, CCUS and methane emission management. What do we do? Basically, we try to represent the gas industry with a single voice towards EU policymakers. And when I talk about gas industry, I mean the broader gases industry. So including, for example, natural gas, biomethane, hydrogen derivatives, and so on and so forth. Of course, our biggest, purpose is to ensure that there is a role in the future, and especially in the decarbonization pathway of Europe, that there is a role for renewable and low carbon gases. So from this first information, you can understand that we have actually, CCUS is part of our toolbox as well. And of course, we hope to contribute with our expertise from the hydrogen and natural gas sectors to create this market for CO2 that we need. I think this was mentioned by the first speaker. Everyone is talking about CCUS, and this is not a new technology. So when I approach for the first time this topic, I kind of ask myself, but what is it, this momentum about? And the answer I gave myself is that in the last couple of years, we have witnessed a lot of changes in energy markets. We have seen especially this trilemma that emerge between decarbonization, security of supply, and affordability. And this, of course, since the Russian aggression against Ukraine. However, I have to say that in the last year, probably maybe 2 years, we have seen another fourth factor that emerged. And this one is the competitiveness factor. In Brussels, I think this is the most repeated word over the last year, but it's an important one. So the question is, why competitiveness is also linked to CCUS technologies? And basically the answer is that CCUS technologies, of course, with the appropriate regulatory framework, they can answer this competitiveness need. They can bridge the gap between decarbonization and competitiveness for certain industries, especially hard-to-abate sectors. As I mentioned, there has been a lot of momentum around CCUS, and there has been also, I have to say, some progress around it, at least from a policy and regulatory perspective, but also projects on the ground, as you have seen with the presentation before mine. In terms of, let's say, EU initiatives, of course, you are very well aware that the Net Zero Industry Act has recognized CCUS technology as strategic. So basically, this regulation as ensure that CCUS technologies are those technologies that we need to achieve the net in our net zero goal. So this is very important. There are also other important elements that have been introduced, such as this value chain approach to CCUS technologies, which is a very positive development. But also, and actually we have seen a delegated act just yesterday, there are some targets now, in this case for injection for gas and oil producers. So you can see that there has been some progress, which of course confine into the industrial carbon management strategies of February 2024. However, some barriers persist, and I've highlighted some of those on the right side of my slide. I will not go too much in the details of these barriers because I think some of those emerged already before, actually. We have discussed about infrastructure and, of course, maybe the lack of infrastructure. That's the first barrier. But there are also regulatory barriers that we will see in a moment. Of course, financing. This is a nascent market. These are expensive technologies. And as was mentioned, I think by Nikolas, there is an ETS price that is still too low to make the business case for CCUS. Public acceptance as well, that has been already mentioned. And this is quite fundamental. I think sometimes it is perhaps overlooked, but public acceptance is fundamental in order also to have, let's say, bottom-up support towards these technologies that sometimes, of course, have been, let's say, have received bad press, as it has been mentioned by previous speakers. And of course, the regulatory framework, and let's say the objective of today's presentation is to understand, let's say, what do we need from a regulatory perspective, what the regulation should provide us to have, let's say, the right policy and commercial drivers to scale up CCUS technologies. So far, I've described you a little bit the context and the situation that, let's say, exists so far when it comes to regulation and when it comes to regulatory incentives for CCUS. But as you know, this 2025 is particularly important, and we are witnessing a lot of changes. In particular, on the 26th of February, the European Commission has delivered the so-called Clean Industrial Deal. This is not actually the only, let's say, initiative proposal that was tabled by the European Commission. You have others, such as the Omnibus Simplification Package, but also the Affordable Energy Action Plan. I just want to briefly touch upon those just to make you understand a little bit the environment in which we are working in Brussels. So the idea is, for example, to cut red tape for companies, but also to make sure that companies, EU businesses can, let's say, access prices that will allow also decarbonization in the future. The Clean Industrial Deal per se, and I think this is the most relevant for CCUS, has been described by the European Commission as a bold plan to ensure that especially hard-to-abate sector and energy-intensive industry, they have an opportunity to decarbonize without, of course, deindustrialization. I'm sure you have looked at the document, but you can see it's a very long list of to-dos for the European Commission, for the industry, but also for member states to achieve this goal. Of course, when we talk about energy-intensive industry and hard-to-abate sectors, of course, our first thought goes to CCUS. So what's in there in the Clean Industrial Deal for CCUS? I have to say that CCUS and industrial carbon management is mentioned as a complementary measure to all those measures listed in the Clean Industrial Deal that, for example, aim at creating a demand for EU products that are clean, that are green. However, there is not much more I have to say about CCUS, and this is unfortunate for especially sending, let's say, a political signal to member states, but also in Europe. There are some to-dos when it comes to CCUS. For example, creating a market for capture carbon. This is one of the objective of the Commission. Building the case, of course, for carbon removals, and we have seen, I think, with the first project that carbon removals have a very important role in also fostering negative emission. and also acknowledging the use of capture carbon in a wider range of products. And here we are basically referring to CCU. So this is what we have basically in the Clean Industrial Deal. And I would like to spend the rest of my presentation by trying to answer the question, the main question. So how do we create a market for CO2? So basically, we are trying to identify what are the policy drivers that we need to scale up CCUS technologies. The first biggest focus for Eurogas is, of course, infrastructure. So the objective is to deploy interconnected, cost-effective infrastructure for CO2 transport and storage. As I mentioned before, I was maybe a little bit negative about the Clean Industrial Deal because as Eurogas, we were hoping to have some clarity on the upcoming regulatory package for the transport and storage of CO2. This has been slightly delayed. The Commission is working on it, and according to the latest information, we should see something perhaps mid-2026. Why is this important? Because we need to, building up on the CCS directive that exists, we need to basically define some of the key rules for infrastructure. For example, if we're talking about pipeline, we need to define, we need to check whether we need third-party access rule, what kind of regulatory model do we want for. We need to discuss, for example, network planning at European level, at more regional level. So there are so many topics that are still, let's say, unclear and where the industry needs answers. As Eurogas, it's not just about the pipelines, and I think this has pretty much been demonstrated by the previous projects. There has to be a combination of transports in different phases. So this has to consistently be recognized in EU regulation. The second, second objective that we should achieve is, of course, and this is something also you heard about, is to create the business case for CCUS. I've already mentioned that there is one important problem, that is ETS price is too low and is also volatile. So this can hamper the business case for CCUS. However, that's not the only thing that we should be looking into. It's important also that we recognize that especially at the beginning of this market, which is where we are now, we might need some public funding. And for example, at European level, we don't have one fund that is only looking at CO2 infrastructure. We have PCI, PMI list, but here CO2 infrastructure are competing with electricity infrastructure, with hydrogen infrastructure. So perhaps we need to evaluate where we need something separate for CO2. Public funding, of course, is not the only way forward, but we need to attract also private investors. And for that, you need a regulation, a regulatory framework that is stable and that is clear. I mentioned ETS price, and here we have, of course, some instruments that can help, such as carbon contract for difference. About that, what to watch from a regulatory perspective, we need to watch this industrial decarbonization bank that has been included in the Clean Industrial Deal. And we need to make sure that this is also covering CCUS technologies, but also the stated framework that was released just a few weeks ago and that will be under consultation until mid-April. So I encourage you, if you have an interest, to have a look at this one. Last but not least, of course, there are, let's say, I would try to sum up the last objective only into one, which is basically, the recommendation is enabling all type of capturing opportunities. So here I'm talking about, for example, industrial CO2 from ETS installation. I'm talking about biogenic CO2. This is crucial, especially from the point of view of Eurogas. We see a very important, let's say, a huge potential when it comes to biomethane and negative emissions. But as it was mentioned by Mats, I think at the very beginning, it's possible only when, of course, it is supported. Also because here also we have some regulatory burden. And the first thing is that we need clear certification for carbon removals. And we need also to understand the pricing mechanism that we need. And here I would, maybe the thing that I would flag us to watch out is the revision of the ETS. The revision of the ETS will come up quite soon. In theory, should be next year, but the work basically has already started. And one of the key issue will be to look how to recognize and account for negative emission within if, of course, if possible, under the EU ETS or perhaps alternative schemes. This is something that, as Rigas, we are looking into it, and of course, we look forward to contribute to this discussion. Other than that, of course, I mentioned already CCU. Here, we need to explore what kind of applications that are not permanent, but we could include. Let's say, how we could foster such application, but also the importance of solid carbon that from our perspective as gas industry, it's very important to be accounted for also under the EU regulation. And I think I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna just wanted to thank you very much, and maybe invite everyone to join us in Amsterdam. I think from today until end of April, many things will change. So I look forward to discussing with all of you. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Ms. Fradi, for the comprehensive and thought-provoking presentation. You've given us a clear vision on the CID and also the challenges and what are needed for future deployment and development. During your presentation, we have also gathered some audience questions. Let's take a look. So the first question is, how developed should the CO2 infrastructure be in order to accommodate a well-functioning CCUS market?
Thank you, Eileen. And indeed, that's a very difficult question because on the one side, we always say, I often say it in my presentation to my colleagues as well, that infrastructure will break or make CCUS. That's pretty much it. I think how well developed should it be? Well, it's not, we probably don't know yet. I mean, the characteristic about the CO2 market is that, as also Nikolas was mentioning, for example, for Southern Europe, it's very different. You have storage that is not evenly distributed. You have some, let's say, industrial clusters. So it's quite difficult to imagine. Of course, you will need, let's say, a sort of backbone at the same times, and I think you need also some sort of flexibility. It's why I mentioned this multimodal transport of CO2 since the very beginning and for the entire duration of our projects, because we don't really know how the market will look. We have an idea a little bit of the main hubs, but still we might need to accommodate also these differences at national level. And for that, we need regulatory flexibility. And of course, as mentioned also by Nikolas, I think cross international cooperation here will be key. So with also EE, but also with other, for example, in the Mediterranean basin.
Thank you so much for your answer. And another question is from our online audience. So what do you think is the optimum financing approach for the CO2 project?
Well, as I mentioned, public funding will be needed for sure, especially to scale up the market until economies of scale are achieved. Because of course, you need to make sure that funding remains sort of technological neutral, and you have a level playing field with our technologies. It's something that we always emphasize as Rigas. We cannot be picky about which one we want to go for. There are so many technologies that might be cost efficient for some areas than others, more cost efficient for some areas than others. So I think we need to, let's say, for sure, let's provide some public funding, but also at the same time making sure that you attract some private investors as well. And of course, as I mentioned, carbon contracts for difference, very, very important, especially to address the volatility and the low ETS price until the price goes up, of course.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your detailed answers. It's clear that policy and commercial strategies are the backbone of CCUS growth, and while significant progress has been made, continued efforts are essential to overcome the challenges that lie ahead. Thank you once again for joining us today.
Thank you.
As we come to the end of today's webinar, let's take a moment to reflect on the ideas we've heard. The journey toward net zero is not just a challenge, it's an opportunity to innovate, collaborate, and create lasting changes. Once again, I want to express my profound gratitude to all our speakers today. Thank you very much for sharing your invaluable insights with us. A sincere thank you also goes to our valued audience for your active participation and thought-provoking questions. You've made this webinar truly engaging and complete. Regarding today's video and presentation slides, we'll share them on our official website, LinkedIn, and YouTube channel next Tuesday, along with some key insights from this webinar. If you have any further inquiries, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at aline@carboncaptureeuropesummit.com. Last but not least, I would like to remind you that this webinar serves as a virtual preview of our in-person event, Carbon Capture Europe Summit 2025, scheduled from April the 29th to 30th at Kid Royal Tropical Institute in Amsterdam. With only 1 month to go, we extend an earnest invitation for you to secure your delegate pass and continue these meaningful discussions with our experts in person. Have a great day and see you next time.